Hello, welcome. I'm Bettina Korick, Chief Executive of the Serpentine. We're so pleased to be here for the launch of Crystals of This Social Substance by artist Jay Bernard in the 20th Serpentine Pavilion, which was been designed by Counterspace, directed by Sumaya Valley, who's also here tonight. She's the youngest architect to date in the history of the commission. And I'd like to wish a warm welcome to everyone who's joining us online. The event will have closed captions, which should be appearing on your screen now, and BSL interpretation will be made available after the event. This pavilion's design is based on past and present spaces of meeting, organizing, and belonging across several London neighborhoods that are significant to diasporic and cross-cultural communities, including Brixton, Hoxton, Tower Hamlets, Edgware Road, Barking and Dagenham, and Peckham. Some community spaces that this structure pays homage to include Fazal Mosque, East London Mosque, cooperative bookshops including Centerprise, entertainment and cultural sites like the Four Aces Club on Dalston Lane, the Mangrove, and Notting Hill Carnival. The forms in the pavilion are the result of abstracting, superimposing, and splicing elements from architectures that vary in scales of intimacy, translating the shapes of London into the pavilion structure in Kensington Gardens. This year, 4 fragments of the pavilion are placed in organizations around London: New Beacon Books in Finsbury Park, the Tabernacle Community Centre in Notting Hill, the Albany Artists Centre in Deptford, and the new Beacon Tree Forever Arts and Culture Hub at Valence Library in Barking Dagenham, which was established this year to commemorate the centenary of UK's largest housing council estate. We're so grateful to Sumaya for her ongoing collaboration, and to Natalia, the curator of the pavilion, for her dedication to making this project manifest in so many ways. Sumaya has continued her research beyond the realms of architecture, developing a summer program with our education and civic teams. And this program, called Listening to the City, which we're here tonight, records London neighborhoods, especially spaces of gathering and belonging, and particularly those that are relevant to migrant communities across the city. At a time when personal listening devices have become ubiquitous, shared spaces for listening are increasingly rare. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you for the team for making this happen. And I'm so thrilled to introduce Alex Thorpe, our education curator, who will tell you more about the commission. And thank you to Jay and to all of Jay's collaborators tonight.
Thanks, Bettina. Well, good evening, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here to present Crystals of This Social Substance, a new sound work by the artist Jay Bernard, commissioned by Serpentine Education for Listening to the City. The work features the voices of young people as they find the language to articulate their personal relationships to money and grapple with how and why it is unevenly distributed across the city. I first met Jay back in 2017 when we worked together with Collective Creativity on a project called Dear Police. It was developed in collaboration with young people from the Church Street neighbourhood just off the Edgware Road in North London. So we were really honoured when Jay accepted our invitation to develop a new sound piece for the pavilion. This work was developed through a series of workshops which took place during June this year, in which Jay invited 8 young people to talk about money. The workshops were based in the triangle of London's Tulse Hill, Brixton and Herne Hill neighbourhoods, an area where Jay grew up, currently live, and describe as a curious mix of deprivation and hyper-privilege. Together, they played the ubiquitous capitalist board game Monopoly and the cult 1978 socialist board game Class Struggle, in order to reflect on and question the worldviews that the games propose. These afternoon workshops, which also encompass visioning and free writing exercises, created space for the young people to describe how it feels to live in their neighbourhood and to think about how their experiences are mediated by global economic forces. it's important to note that the young people were paid for their time. So we're really excited to have you all here this evening, and to let you know that it will be playing in the pavilion for free for the next month, and presented in Lisa Immersive Hyperreal Sound. So now to the thank yous, and to acknowledge the contributions of everybody who took part in the project. A huge, huge thank you to the 8 young people who took part in the workshops. They remain anonymous, but we wish to extend a heartfelt thank you to them for their thought-provoking contributions. We'd also like to thank the organisations that helped us to connect with the young people. Alleyne School, the Bay Tree Centre, Brixton Youth Theatre, Dulwich College, High Trees Community Development Trust, and ML Community Enterprise. We'd also like to extend a thank you to Magdalene Rubel-Kaver and T. Adiel Lokun from Glows Tulse Hill, and Gerald Vanderpew, Lowly Essen, and Alessandro at Impact Brixton for hosting the workshops and for making us feel very welcome. To L Acoustics for supporting our Sound Commission programme, to Paul Keating, Simon Hendry, Stephen Hughes, and Davy Williamson for their ongoing dedication to making this project the best it could be. A special thank you to Griff Hewis, who recorded the workshops and edited the material into what you hear this evening, and to Femi Oriogun Williams for their original composition that features in the sound piece. We and Jay really appreciate all of your work in making this happen. And to the team at the Serpentine, of course, to Ben Messai, Gemma Egan, Holly Shuttleworth, and Joe Payton, who have worked so tirelessly to realise this project. To Philip, Jasmine, Jordan, Shuki, and to all of the production team for your support in realising this evening. And to Somi Amolu, Hansel Ulrika Brist, and Bettina Korek for their ongoing support of the programme. And finally, to Jay Bernard, who's created a really powerful sound piece and has been such a wonderful person to work with and learn from. So thank you, Jay. So we're very excited to invite our panellists here for this evening. Could I welcome you to join us on stage, please? Here tonight we have Lola Olufemi, who's a Black feminist writer and Cream Stuart Hall Foundation researcher from London. Her work focuses on the use of the feminist imagination and its relationship to cultural production, political demands, and futurity. Micah van der Drift is a philosopher and educator working on ethics, trans studies, technology, and performance. They're currently working on a collective performance project in Kiev titled Sambatas Stagings, and a project titled Extractivism, Datification, and Transformative Justice. Mariam Dijgalvite is a games industry critic and content creator dissecting the intersection between video games and in real life politics. Their expertise lies in researching the radical political history and cultural output of the 20th century and applying them to the development of politics in the gaming sphere. And Jay Bernard, an artist from London whose work is interdisciplinary, critical, queer, and rooted in the archives. As well as being a film programme at BFI Flair, they were named Sunday Times Young Writer of the Year 2020 and won it at the 2017 Ted Hughes Award for Serge Side, a cross-disciplinary exploration of the new crossfire in 1981. We're very sorry that Noni Makiana from Decolonising Economics couldn't be here tonight due to illness, and we send our very best wishes for their speedy recovery. So we'll start by welcoming each of our 5 contributors who will present a proposal for a game, followed by a discussion with the panel. And then there'll be an opportunity for some audience questions at the end, so please do have a think. And then that will be followed by the premiere of Crystals of this Social Substance. Thank you for joining us, and enjoy.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. This is really nice, and I'm really happy to be on this amazing panel as well, to kind of launch the sound piece, but also to talk about, I think, one of the key motives or like reasons why I wanted to make the piece the way that I did, and that was because I realized that when I was younger, we never talked about money, not in any meaningful way anyway. And that was kind of like the impetus for this whole piece, yeah, and for this whole project and kind of the way that I went about it. So for this panel, I thought it would be awesome to invite some other people to kind of like think about that, to think about how we conceptualize our relations, right? Our relationships economically, our relationships socially, and so on, and how we can like crystallize those into like games that interrogate those relationships, because that was kind of like what I really wanted to do with this piece and with the little pack that comes afterwards, which we're all going to talk about. So yeah, I'm glad you're all kind of here on this journey with me for this. I'm going to go first because I decided I would be the sacrificial lamb tonight, and I'm going to talk about the pack basically that came that we kind of developed as part of the sound installation. So if we put the first slide on. Ah, great, there it is. Woo. So this piece is called Crystals of a Social Substance, which comes from Marx. And we decided to call this Dosh because it was probably the most popular like title of all the ones that we had. And when I kind of like was conceiving it, I was thinking about when I was like a teenager at school, and I don't know if everyone's had this experience, but there was always like a poor kid at school. I know that's super harsh, but I was the poor kid when I was at primary school, and then when I got to secondary school, there was one person in particular who I think just got all the flack, right? Because they came from this like super like poor background, and we never talked about it. Everybody in the school knew this. All the kids knew it. All the teachers knew it. It was really, really obvious. It was really, really clear. But there was never once a lesson or an exercise or a conversation or anything that in any way addressed why this particular person had so much less than everybody else. So yeah, we decided to kind of like go with that. If you go to slide 2, please. So in the very kind of like early phases of developing the sound piece, this was kind of like my notebook. And you can kind of see that I was like just like throwing together some ideas about how to kind of put this together. And I'd say there were like 2 elements that kind of like jumped out. And the first one was maybe the big red arrow at the top, which it says, I would like a teacher or student to feel like they might be able to better broach discrepancies, something that's kind of reusable. And then the second one at the bottom, which is a lesson on difference. This is something that's never really addressed in school because there's no space for it. And I think there's no space for it because there's often like very few resources that kind of allow us to talk about it. So in both the game and the sound piece, I would say that I wanted to do like 4 things. First of all, I wanted to kind of like find a way for people to just notice what's kind of going on around them and to notice the way that money appears, right? It's this kind of like physical set of notes, but it's also the appearance of things around us. Second, I wanted to move beyond some of the more like obvious questions or some of the more like obvious ways that money is discussed. Third, I wanted to ask questions that are maybe a bit difficult and a bit challenging. And this was something that kind of like came up in the development side of it because some of the questions I wanted to ask, I think were a bit too intense for 7 to 14-year-olds. Nonetheless, I wanted to kind of ask them. So maybe that's for the later package. And then the fourth one was that I wanted it to be about doing. So I wanted like the pack to have like exercises and ways that we could kind of like enact some of the social relations as well. So on slide 3, or next slide even. So we played this game which is called Class Struggle. Has anyone played this game? No one's played. Has anyone played Monopoly? Yeah, exactly, right. So this is kind of why I wanted to play this game. It's a really amazing game by this guy named Bert Ullman, and it's cool. It's basically like You have to build alliances and set up like trade unions and things like this in order to get to the end, which is revolution. But even when you get to the end, the capitalists can still win, and so you can end up with either socialism or barbarism. It's not the most fun game, I have to confess. It's okay, but it has its limitations. Nonetheless, it was kind of like one of the games that was kind of behind the development of DOSH. We also like looked at a game called Mince Spies, which I think is a kind of like midlife crisis sort of Christmas alcoholism game. And then also tarot. I would definitely have characterized this game DOSH as like money tarot for children. And then Brian Eno's Oblique Strategies, which I think is like super famous and like kind of like well-known series of cards that aim to get people to kind of like think differently. And then the fourth was Settlers of Catan, which is an awesome colonial game where you kind of take over people's land. But we really like the kind of hexagonal kind of nature of that, and that was actually Ben's like genius insight, which is why the cards are hexagonal. So we move on to the next. So this is the kind of development of it. Like we looked at like those little pizza sweets that you can get from like a sweet shop, and then I was like, what if you had a game that was about redistribution? So like slice of the pie or something like this, and then I decided to call it pie. And then I also like looked at like different ways that we can think about like putting things together. So the relational side of it would be kind of spatial and like geometrical. So those were mirror Ori folds that I like cut out and tried with those. And I also thought about Penrose tiles, which are kind of infinite patterns that never repeat. I also looked at things like Gödel's incompleteness, which is like a truth statement that has no proof. And I kind of went through all of those, and of course, you know, you go through all of that only to end up with the next slide. Actually, yeah, keep going, next one. That was what it kind of ended up looking like initially. So basically we went through all of that to end up with kind of like this, which was just a series of like super geometric, really nicely colored, really simple like hexagons that kids could kind of engage with. And so there's kind of like two sides to the game. You can like play around with all of these shapes, and you can like make something like super spatial and beautiful. But then there's also this kind of like other side to it, which is the next slide, which is a series of prompts. And this is really like Oblique Strategies, but like kind of like applied to this idea of money. So I kind of wanted the prompts to be a series of things, to be super difficult questions, like where does money come from? Is it okay to steal? Combined with things that are a bit more kind of like lateral thinking. So if money could talk, what would it say? What is the sound of money? Hopefully this sound piece might be the sound of money, for example. And then things that were also a little bit more like pointy and sharp and spiky. So the government bans luxury flats is obviously a nod to the fact that that's all that happens with spaces these days. It's like, oh look, there's a park, let's turn it into luxury flats. So like I wanted to kind of like talk about some of those like little like social things as well. We had some questions in here that were like a lot more kind of like confronting, and we realized that actually that was too much for kids, like 7 to 14, and we needed to really think about how that might feel to receive something that kind of like directly like prodded, you know, the very sensitive issue of like having no money. So hopefully these prompts are a lot more kind of like open and like creative, and even though they're aimed at like 7 to 14, are still challenging in some way. I actually find some of these still a little bit challenging as an adult. So if we go on to the next slide. So those were basically the instructions. Start a conversation, draw a response, write your thoughts, make a swap, create a pattern, listen to yourself and others, invent a your own way to play, shuffle, swap, skip, change it all. There are no wrong answers. And I would say that listen to yourself and others was probably the most important one and the key one, and the one that I think meant the most to me. Certainly when I think back to my like 10-year-old self, it would have just been so nice to have had a way to understand that my financial situation and my economic situation wasn't my fault. There was a larger social structure associated with it. So yeah, that was the kind of development, and so this is what they look like. We made a kind of dummy version of the game, and yeah, so there's basically like 120 different little cards, and they're going to be available here once the piece launches on Sunday. And they're also going to like 4,000 kids, I think, around London, so they'll be able to kind of play this as well, which is super awesome. So yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate that. So yeah, that was kind of like my piece. I guess it would make sense to just kind of like
Go to mine.
jump right on
Yeah.
to Lola Olufemi. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Jay. That was really wonderful. So, could I have my slide up, please? I can just start talking then.
Yeah, just
So yeah, when Jay asked us to kind of come up with this idea or to think of a game, I was really struck because I was like, oh, okay, this is a real invitation to imagine. It's an invitation to kind of go back to like childhood and play and all of these things that we put away when we're adults. So for me, I've been thinking recently about kind of like habitation and design and what it would mean to understand, you know, the spaces that we occupy as capable of kind of like leaving imprints and impressions and echoes on us as people, but also on our capacity to imagine. So like I said, I thought of this as a kind of imagination experiment. The slides that I was going to show were two kind of pictures. So one was a picture of a project that June Jordan did with Buckminster Fuller in 1965, where she attempted to redesign Harlem in the wake of the murder of James Powell, who was a black teenager. And the other was a kind of like early design of Broadwater Farm Estate in Tottenham. And yeah, I was thinking about these kind of two spaces, and the latter I was thinking about because it kind of represents, there it is, the kind of failure of utopian design. If you go to Broadwater Farm Estate, you can see the vision that the council had, but that never really kind of came to fruition. And so I've been thinking a lot about space. And I wanted to read, in order to kind of contextualize my game that I'll go on to explain, I wanted to read just a little section from this book that I just wrote called Experiments in Imagining Otherwise, which is about the purpose of design. So it starts with this quote by June Jordan, and she says, quote, "I would wish to indicate the determining relationship between architectonic reality and physical well-being. I hope that we may implicitly instruct the reader in the comprehensive impact of every where of any place. This requires development of an idea or theory of place in terms of human being, of space designed as the volumetric expression of successful existence between earth and sky, of space cherishing as it amplifies the experience of being alive, and the capability of endless beginnings, and the entrusted liberty of motion, of particular space connected to multiple spatialities, a particular space that is open, receptive, and communicant, yet sheltering particular life." So this is what I wrote kind of in response to that. I said, we don't think that the layout of a house or a street can determine our capacity for being. Living as we do on top of one another with no room to stretch our legs or for our children to play, and being so isolated, not knowing our next door neighbors, not knowing whom we can depend on in an emergency, is a political question. But design, as I'm thinking about it, is more than just an architectural component. It's more than just the arrangement of physical objects in order to make something. Design is also the speech that we use to build and give meaning to the world around us. And June Jordan knew this. If you changed how people conceived of living, you could also change their understanding of themselves and their relations with others, breaking the inertia of this unlivable life. The way we talk about this life and living, the language we use, builds a kind of structure that turns the horizon, that point where potentiality meets the substance of our reality, into a mirage. When we say housing for all, and the government responds with, the homeless are being temporarily housed in hostels to avoid the spread of the virus, they're building a linguistic structure that defines the realm of the possible, and that implicitly tells us to want less, to expect that total reconfiguration is out of the question. Like a poorly designed building, linguistic structures affect how we think, how we breathe, and how we move and how we act. That mold sticks to our skin. This one, in particular, is the preservation of a system of organization that places capital before all else. It ties our hands and feet together. But if we follow Jordan, everywhere and every place has a comprehensive impact. And so everything we do and say that brings place and space into existence, that defines its contours, that explicitly makes clear who can and cannot enter, also has an impact. And so to get free, we have to redesign linguistic structures before they morph into linguistic loops. Or in the meantime, at least get comfortable with repetition. So I was kind of thinking about this as a way to contextualize my game. So my game would be called This Is Not a Disaster Game, and it's more of a thought experiment, I think, than an actual game. But I was thinking about it as a kind of navigable multiplayer simulation where the aim is to make the Earth habitable using every resource but money. And by habitable, I think I mean in the way that June Jordan imagined space as a volumetric expression between earth and sky, as space as a kind of holder of hopes and dreams. So the aim is to reach this state where people can live free. And this is a kind of open-ended aim, and that's important to me. I was thinking about this question, the question of freedom is never done, it's never decided. And so this game is one that keeps going and going. And so the players have to decide their priorities. What does freedom mean to them? They might, for example, first decide that they want to seize and kind of repurpose property. I think often when we think about money and the flow of capital, it is kind of at the center of our lives. And I'm interested in a game where the aim is not accumulation of land or property or resource, but the question of identifying resources that are already around us, that we already kind of live amongst, and parceling them out. So a game that encourages us to use relational skills in order to navigate the world, to imagine that we can make money inconsequential. So, for example, the first aim in this game might be to secure housing for everyone in a specific local area. And so the players would have to think, would have to come up with a way to do that that isn't just, using money to buy flats and housing everyone. They might seek to find, empty housing and squat. That means that in terms of their skill set, they need people who are willing to risk imprisonment or know kind of squatting law and rights. They need people who can do teach-ins, people who can do political education. So the players would have to decide how they will acquire these skills and how they'll bargain for them as well, because they can't use money. And so they'll interact with a range of obstacles along the way. So those threats could be state violence, the police, NGOs who might try and co-opt those movements. Also kind of parliamentary politics, media misconstruction, misconstruction of the kind of work that they're doing, other people, the right wing. There are loads of things that might stop them from being able to kind of reach the goal that they set in terms of what freedom is. So then more of the questions that they might think about if their aim, in this imagined scenario was to secure housing, what strategy will they use to take over the land? How will they organize the space once they have it? How do you feed people without money? So the only kind of rule that I thought, I wanted to keep it kind of open-ended, but the only rule that I thought was that you can't use money, but everything else is at your disposal. And I think I wanted to take that approach to really hammer home that we have enough resources around us really to adequately address all of these problems, climate crisis, capitalist crisis, all of these overlapping crises that plague us, really. So that's kind of what I was thinking about in terms of my game. I hope I explained that well.
Amazing.
Thank you. I really enjoyed that you have seized property as one of the aims.
That's the first. Well,
that's pretty cool. Did you imagine this as a board game or as a video game?
That's a good question. I think I first imagined it kind of like The Sims, so not as a board game at all, actually. But I think it is the kind of game, it has a similar kind of structure to Class Struggle, so it could be flattened. And I also think it could be simplified. In line with your kind of game, you could really simplify what you're asking people to imagine freedom looks like, because that does look different for everybody. So not as a board game initially.
Yeah, cool, awesome. Electronic.
Yeah.
Nice. Sweet. All right. Micah?
Shall I kick off? Well, this talk is going to be on a very different register, people.
Lower the tone, it's fine.
Sorry, my voice is also a bit harsh, a bit cold. So, I don't play that many games as such as a philosopher. I think we do language games. So, in the end, we're going to come to language games. But the last time I saw a game played, I was on a trip from Arbroath to London. And I was traveling with an incredibly good filmmaker from East London, now living in East London, Rihanna Zaman. And Rihanna was playing with Camille, and they were playing a game, and I don't know, it might have been called Snap, I don't know. And you put cards down, and once you see two the same cards, you have to go Snap. And then you get to have all the cards. Sometimes you have to make sure that the other person gets all the cards. Sometimes you have to make sure yourself gets all the cards. The game has many different variations. And so they were playing, and maybe at this point it helps to know that Camille is 3 years old. So at some point Rihanna said snap, took the cards, and Camille just threw the cards on the floor of the train, had to cry, had to be cuddled. And I was with Camille. I could totally feel him, you know. I was like, yeah, man, this is how I would react too. And I react like that because I was mostly raised by my slightly older brother who was very affirmative. So he never taught me to lose games. I just didn't receive the training, stupidly enough. And I remember one summer, we just moved to a new place. It was a tiny village. We had just gotten this farm, and we would be farming from then on. Sounds dramatic. And we knew no one, so my brother and me started to play Monopoly. This was, of course, no success. That was very clear to both of us, because I couldn't stand losing. And my brother would always win, because he was older, right? So what we did, because we were raised by kind of a socialist mom, we seized the means of production. So we immediately got all the streets, all the houses, all the hotels, and then we started to play against the bank. This was a major success because the bank kept running over our street and they were losing money and we had to lend them money. And we were like on the same team, like winning from the bank. We didn't realize at that age that we had become the bankers. I think that was a step too difficult. You know, I was 7, give me a break. But what I did learn at that moment, apart from seizing the means of production, was also like, hey, if the situation doesn't work out and you're pitted against each other while you want to be friends, by having imposed competition on you, better change the situation, right? And work together. But sometimes that means you have to look at the situation afresh. And I learned this again later, after the summer of super best friends with my brother, when I started to study theater. And then Keith Johnstone, a theater improvisation person, wrote a book called Impro. You can find the game back in this book, right? Give my sources away. And the game is sometimes like, you know, you go through the everyday and, wow, the space you're in, obviously not in this pavilion because it's new and it's shiny, it's beautiful, it really catches your eye. But, you know, in the everyday, sometimes you don't see your area anymore. So what you can do, and I'm going to try to play it. I haven't not played it in a long time, but so you point at something, and it needs to go obviously very fast, because otherwise it doesn't work. So you point to something and give it a name that it doesn't yet have. So it's going to be sheep, cow, train, ship, crate, wardrobe, noose, moose, yeah, snake. So, and everything becomes new again. It's really worth doing it. And at some point, if you play it long enough and go a bit faster than I'm now, then you see that the fork just lifts. And at some point, you only have to think about this game, and the fork lifts, right? So now, back to money. You can try it out if you want. I can give you a moment. Just do it.
Oh, I just called it a ceiling.
The artist.
I lost the game.
Now, and then I thought, because I thought we were particularly going to speak about the redistribution of money in art in this moment, which is my mistake. I don't know why, maybe because it was an art gallery. And I thought, wow, we can actually use this same game. Like we point to an artist, and we give them a name of a very famous artist, Marina Abramovic. And we pay Jay what Marina Abramovic would have been paid. I think it's an amazing game.
This is a great game.
Right? And then at the same time, we point to Marina Abramovic, and we give her a name and go, Meike van der Drift. and then we pay Marina Abramovic the money Meike van der Drift would have been paid. And of course, we have to find a catch to get Marina Abramovic involved. And, and this is the point where, like Jay, I know Jay, first and foremost, I guess, as a poet. And what is that language game of poetry is to bring meaning and language as close as possible together so that there's more potentiality going. And for Marina Abramovic, we can use marketing, because marketing takes meaning and language as far away possible from each other so that there's as little meaning as possible in that moment, right? So what we offer Marina Abramovic to take part in this game is to be rediscovered by the audiences she knows so well. You cannot refuse that, right? So that is my art game. Radical redistribution.
I do think we should all take a moment to play this game, though. I know I just failed horribly, but I am the sacrificial lamb in this situation. I think it'd be quite cool. So, someone famous, right?
I know, I have to look up a post.
Britney Spears, right?
Britney
You've got the
Spears.
mics.
Yes, I got the Britney
But do you want to be Britney Spears right
No,
now?
then I immediately have a curator.
Yeah, because you'd be owned by your father.
Oh,
That
no,
would-
no, that's
That goes down a dark
no.
path. I can't think of a single artist.
People have that often
one
when they
artist
point
is
at me.
Do they have to be living? No.
No,
Living or dead? Okay.
no, I don't mind.
Oh, we're waiting for me to.
Yeah.
Oh my god, the pressure. An artist.
I know, suddenly there are none, right?
Your brain is
Imagine
empty.
a world without
Audience suggestions? Damien Hirst.
Damien
I
Hirst.
love that. That would be well paid.
Yeah,
Oh.
it would.
It's interesting that that's the principal thing we're thinking about. We're being like, oh, wealthy artists,
Yeah.
as opposed to their talent or like practice or
Or like
anything
Ai
that.
Weiwei.
Oh yeah, Ai Weiwei. Yeah, that'd be cool.
Wealthy artist.
Yeah.
Jeff Koons, wealthy
Jeff Koons.
artist.
Yeah. Nice. All right.
Yeah, I'll talk of some artists as well, so I'll flex my muscle there.
Go for it.
Okay, dogs, I believe there might be some slides if it's all cool. I guess I'll lean on them a bit. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. This is such a privilege, and also what a distinguished panel, and also just really incredible to have conversations about material conditions at the Serpentine Gallery. That doesn't happen often. If anything, of course, money runs through the arteries of the space, and yet now it's now a bit put on the table, and there's a discourse around, and that's very, very fascinating. So please, the next one, because this is, I guess, just a little intro one. So definitely a bit of dread entered me when I started thinking again also about the brief. Sounds easy: money, young people, play, and at all times I found myself at a dead end of sadness and grief, because perhaps because I'm myself informed by the personal experiences of also 8 years of squatting in London, and just also thinking about the plight of a working class person in the city. Well, exactly, unless you are privileged enough to come from a middle class background or have property here. If you're a young person in London, essentially your existence is that of distance to real estate and to property. And when I think of money, I mean, money is nice to spend on your little, maybe, your night out, or clothes, or food for that night, but eventually the dread of material security will come in, and that is all to do with let's be honest, again, property, and London is a space that is so full of speculating when it comes to that, right? So we're all, and then so really, I think this talk will be quite informed by precisely that, my own personal insecurity when it comes to any attempt of grasping that material security, and one that if you're a working class kid in London without security, that's what you're gonna have to deal with. And so I come from video games industry background, so I guess I thought of those a little bit more, and I slightly cheated. I suppose I thought of a couple of ideas, but they're super basic. And then I kind of also thought at the end that perhaps we shouldn't be reinventing the bicycle, and then some of the most important playful tools are kind of perhaps already with us. So few ideas that I had was I thought my game needs to be investigative, it needs to be exploratory, it needs to be playful, all the buzzwords, and I guess but then there are a couple of games. So anyways, we'll go for the first one. Now, please, next slide. And it's really nice also to be in an artistic institution, and the fact that I can then flex my artistic muscles. I did do that, a BA at Central St. Martin's in Fine Arts and the rest, so I do know some artists, and Hans Hacke is actually one of the few political artists that I really admire, because he didn't just make political art, he made tools out of his political art. So, so this is the piece by him in 1971. He invited a bunch of his celeb friends, artist friends, in a space in New York City, to have an exhibition opening, a party. And upon arrival to the exhibition, to the opening of the exhibition, the viewers were met with 142 investigative pieces of corruption and horrible, just abuse of power by the biggest, so-called slum landlord, essentially, just of very, very poor areas of New York City at the time. And the piece was meant to be then shown at Guggenheim, but Guggenheim saw it and actually canceled the exhibition, and is to this day seen as one of the biggest kind of institutional critique pieces. And what he did is that he didn't necessarily just create a political art piece, he actually made a weapon out of his art. He made it a tool out of his art. And this is my worry sometimes with political art, is that it creates these symbols that essentially maybe preach to the converted. Let's be honest, they meet the audiences that probably already have politics that people share. And so I'm thinking, would it be possible now with the new introduction of inventive ways of presenting data and news, that a game in today, in 2021, that perhaps would do this type of investigative work could be released via a video game, and maybe not necessarily released, let's say, via The Guardian or the Steam, where we just end up in an echo chamber, but maybe via the Financial Times. Actually, there is precedent to that. A game called Uber Game, an Uber game, was released via the Financial Times, and that really showed the terrible plight that the Uber drivers go through. So I'm just thinking, how could a game be a tool? So that was one idea, that we produce and we create data. We present data in a game-like reaction, and then it can actually be used for then, whether that's policy change or whatnot. Okay, next slide, please. And then this is another introduction of one of my favorite artists, I suppose. Again, utilizing real-life aspect of politics in his work, and going back to your idea, Lola, of Sims as well, because that is a massively political game. It's so funny how people just sort of see it as just some interior design game, but actually incredible social dynamics, and actually lack of creativity and/or diversity, of course, in the game happens. And yeah, also, let's be honest, it's a bit of a I guess a sandbox to imagine your capitalist ideas. One of the jokes was like, wait, how does it go? But yeah, the Sims is essentially is where you realize your biggest dreams, i.e. having a house and having friends. Yeah. So anyways, but going back to this, probably my favorite political artist is Santiago Sierra, who he works with he very much works with real people, and actually gets a lot of flack over it. So he will pay a day's wage to migrants, for instance, and we'll just have them do manual labor in a gallery or so, or just stand in the gallery. Or one of his more controversial pieces, of course, also was that in the Venice Biennale in 2004, no one was allowed to. Only Spanish citizens were allowed to go inside the pavilion. So he really just kind of flips that liberal idea being very, very comfortable upon seeing a political piece and actually makes somebody really, really uncomfortable. And so it also kind of references me a little bit to, of course, David Graeber's idea of bullshit jobs. And again, if you're a young working class person in London, you probably will do, well, interesting, bullshit jobs will not be your first job because those are usually actually important jobs as retail and or, some, service industry jobs, but it's that lower managerial class that really then becomes the bullshit job. That this is late David Graeber's idea of that is a theory that postulates the existence of meaningless jobs and analyzes their societal harm. So I thought that in this, it would be interesting to create a game where perhaps it's a bit of a simulator, because I think most of us, maybe working class a lot in London, definitely felt that existence of. Okay, I'm now let's describe the game. So at the bottom you see the Sims there, and I'm thinking, what if you are, a person in a room? Well, let's say it's like a studio flat, or maybe even one-bedroom flats, and you have to do a few things, So you get up, you have a shower, you make your meal, and then I don't know, you pet your pet, and then you go to work. But every day, as the days go by, your flat and your place gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, and it becomes more and more difficult to make do, essentially. And again, I was telling you today before the talk as well, I think how my experience is I lived in zone 1, and then I lived in zone 2, and then in 3 and 4 and 5, and I'm in zone 6, and actually this year I'm leaving London because that's just, I've been priced out. It is what it is, and it just seems, and again, this is one of those probably preaching to converted ideas, but it's exploratory because it really places you, I suppose, in very, very much understanding the conditions that so many young people find themselves in. Yeah, if they don't stay at their parents, they will probably, and again, maybe 15 years ago it was possible to pay £600 for like a one-bedroom flat in zone 1. Now that will buy you a small room in like zone 6 with 12 other people, and that's just the reality of the city. And yeah, it's kind of, it's very complicated to even have that conversation about money, I suppose, when this is just so much of our everyday. Anyways, next slide, thank you. And this is, I suppose, the final one where I was just thinking that, the idea of play was, especially in the space of fine art, was beautifully, I suppose, popularized by the Situationist movement of the 1960s. Reminded me a lot, again, about what what you were saying, Lola, about really just reimagining what a city or a space can be, because that's what the real idea was very much what the Situationists were doing. And this is what I'm saying, why necessarily reinvent the bike? There are some incredible games already that do reimagine what the city could be, and the best of them challenge it and maybe even create these discursive and challenging, situations in the city that really make us not see a city as what it became. So I guess fairly recently is that it is just a vehicle for transporting of goods and labor. That's all the city is. It's not for people to live in. And it would be great to maybe rethink that. And playing something as silly as capture the flag can be a subversive tool if done in the right location. For instance, gentrified areas, etc. Local businesses all of the time don't necessarily like that. But then I was saying that, and it's just, but also some communities are way more criminalized than others. It's very easy for a bunch of like middle-class white folk to perhaps play capture the flag. Most definitely not as easy for criminalized communities most of the time. People of color in London who would not get away with doing stuff like this. So I'm thinking maybe not necessarily does it have to be running around or something. It can also, the destruction of arcades, for instance, is something that's really upsetting. It was one place where working class kids were able to hang out and play, and we just don't have those spaces anymore in London. So maybe we can maybe play even Pokemon Go in one space, or bring our Nintendo Switches or whatever. Again, it's reclaiming those spaces and thinking of their power, thinking of what demands can we set out for that space, and and just, I guess, having fun with it. Because, next slide, be realistic, demand the impossible. That is the beautiful Situationist quote that I try and live my life by. And yeah, let's try and do that, because otherwise it's all really depressing and sad. But we can't tell that to the kids. They have to be hopeful and actually hopefully bring that better tomorrow that we can all hope for. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thank you. That's an awesome game, and one that I really really resonates. At one point, I lived in a shoebox in Brixton. I was paying £700 a month. Like, I had a bed, and my kitchen was like where you are, and that was kind of it. Really, it was depressing.
Hella depressing.
That's super awesome. All right, thank you so much. Appreciate it. I think we have time for like a couple of questions. I think if anyone had any. Otherwise, I can just kind of dive in. No?
Shut everyone up.
Okay, no one's jumping in. That's totally fine. I mean, I guess I had one question, which was. Oh, is there a question?
Yes.
Oh yeah, go for it. Cool.
Oh, sorry. Okay. So basically, my question is related more or less to kind of each topic, and obviously the kind of introduction of the idea of the game. They in a way kind of allowed the discourse about who is dictating the rules and which are the rules in the games. Every game, in a way, I would say, has some rules, and the people, in a way, that play the game have to, in a way, collaborate in itself. As you said, there is a conflict between them. But the important thing is that there is actually something that governs, right, the sort of relationship between the people that play the game. And at the same time, this is related to architecture, because at the same, there's a person that in a way create or design the space to a group of people, but then who is the person that actually decide how the people move or interact within the space? So my, in a way, question was related to, in general, or your topics, and what is the rule in your game? Thank you.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, actually, because I think you touched on something that, like, definitely I noticed when I was developing mine, and also when I was doing the sound piece, which is that you kind of want to approach these things with a certain level of openness, but I think you have to be realistic and face the rules as well, right? And face, like, the limitations that make it a boundary thing that can be recognizable as a game. And, like, when I was even doing the sound piece, I was like, oh, wow, you're kind of a dictatorial artist here. You are actually like determining how all of this works, and how. Otherwise, what is it? So yeah, that's a really. So I think it's quite an interesting question. I don't know what everyone else.
I think like the Keith Johnstone game, the theater improvisation, which is based on games, they're very non-competitive, and usually there's just in theater impro there's just one rule. And that is affirm what somebody else approaches you with. So if you get tea with a slightly thing, you know it's going to be poison. So you have to die on that moment, right? Drinking the poison tea or, whatever it is. So it is always saying yes to whatever happens, right? And this is why theater impro is quite unhelpful to stage political protest with. But it's very, very good to get rid of some of the stress for why you need political protest, right? And this is, I think, why I brought the Keith Johnston game in, because it's a game that doesn't make you win or lose. It's just a game to refresh the conditions under which you live, to then see what can come next. Yeah.
I think with my game, I guess when you're trying to provide an invitation to other people to imagine, you don't actually want to give them that many rules. So I thought of my kind of one rule of not being able to use money more as a kind of governing structure that in a way mimics, how we live. We live in a very rule-bound, boundaried society. Our relations are boundaried by all of these kind of structures of power and structures of violence. And to me, I wanted to leave the possibility for the players to bring in elements of the fantastical as well, right? Like, so maybe when I was describing the game, people thought very practically about how do you get money when you don't have food? You steal it, or you share it, etc. But I wanted there also to be space to be like, I don't know, you're magic, you're a wizard, and you magic the food, and everybody is, everybody is saved and everybody is fed, but in ways that undermines the kind of purpose of the game or the teaching element of the game, right? But yeah, I think that's what play is about. It's about like expanding and contracting those boundaries and giving people the space to figure out actually what it is, how they will conceive of the governing structure that you've given them and what boundaries they'll set for themselves, because that's really interesting. Someone might be like, okay, yeah, magic is involved and I've solved every problem, and another person might take a really kind of strategic and tactical approach, and that tells us something differently about how people are situating themselves in relation to others and situating themselves in relation to these structures of violence.
Yeah, well, I guess first reaction when I hear about trying to describe too much of the games is that, again, coming from games industries, like game designers, a whole profession by themselves, and they spend hours and hours and have full salaries trying to understand those intricacies exactly of manipulating this bit or that and getting some sort of reaction out of this. So this is not even an answer that any of us can even have in a very, I guess, profound way, because there's a whole science behind it, and the best, I guess, game designers do find ways to make you think as eventually what they want you to think with different mechanics and or ways or rewards or different ways of structuring the game. So. But again, I know about the themes that we're even talking of today. It's just the game's rigged, It's already is, and I already know who's the winner there and who's the loser. And although there's so much beauty and kind of naivete and some kind history of the idea of play, again, seeing today, just constantly the negative effects and manipulation. Jesus Christ, how much. Just radicalization of the far right happens in the video games industry as well, all maybe somehow disguised under this, just a playful space, and parents allow games to, kids to perhaps just play safely, but actually all end up going very, very, very bad towards a very bad direction very quickly. So yeah, but I think you're correct in saying that the person that creates the game can already say that they are in a hierarchical, relationship here with the player. That there's, even as an anarchist, I can say that's a reasonable understanding of those relationships, I suppose.
You said something that made me question the terminology that we're using. You talked about play and then you talked about games. Now, I don't think those two things are the same thing, actually, now that I think about it. Because to play, there's a kind of infinite openness. And a game implies a certain closedness, actually.
It depends as well. But for instance, I think of massive multiplayer games, right? They only give you a certain outline, but then it's the relationships that you build inside, or perhaps the communities that you build, and things that allow something to blossom. So, but yeah, I understand. I agree that these are terms that should be defined somehow a bit more.
I think also within the game there is the possibility of a kind of infinite playfulness, or in the relations that you have inside the game. I think whenever I think of playing a game when I was younger, it's not necessarily the game itself, it's the fact that I played with other people. And that's what I remember. And I think that's where the potential lies, more than just like the concept of play or the concept of the game. Which I think all of our kind of games had in common in a way. It's like relation, whether you're like trapped inside a building that's becoming smaller and smaller, or whether you're concerned about like how the like money that people will get. That it all comes back to like, our ability to be with one another and to know each other in meaningful ways.
But I think also with play, what you see is also with animals like calves, they angle their tail and they make a ba sound, sort of, not with this voice, obviously. And then the rest of the cow herd knows, the little calf is playing, it's not actually in panic, And I think with a game, the rules mark that safe space, that something can happen what you cannot do in the everyday life. And the same is with playing. If I go now kind of playing, I don't know, it would just be quite out of place, quite, sometimes unfortunately. You know, so play often requires at least a wink or something, like, you know, like, hey, this is going to be make-believe.
I suppose I agree with that when it comes to like actual games, but I also think about like the gamification of life and how like you can be playful in all of our, 'cause obviously we're all playful in all of our relations, but in everyday life there are these like kind of hard and fast rules versus I think childhood when you're kind of not bound by those, and that was something that I was thinking about with like developing Dosh. It was like kids, they have a inkling of the real world and they are in many ways bound by it, but there's also like in actual play, like when you watch them, there's a kind of like, it's so open-ended and it kind of goes and it turns into something else. First of all, it's the floor is lava, then it becomes then it becomes like, we're gonna do cooking today, you know what I mean? Like, whereas I feel like games themselves, and when I think about like kind of like the lives that we all live, we're all playing this game, right? Like we're all kind of like sussing out and we all kind of know the rules, and the rules are quite intense and very, very clear, and they will like slap you down.
And narrow, very narrow
And
as well.
Exactly.
But doesn't it also then hit the point exactly that when does that self-awareness comes in is when you start getting anxiety about how you're going to be perceived in the world in order for you to then, you know, somehow meet your material needs. So always feels, well, I mean, obviously, well, what excuse rich people have? I'm not sure, but yeah, it's but again, I'm, you know, thinking like big sports, like with the big sports events as well, that there's just the idea of the game, then we just enjoy ourselves, and there's a community behind it now, you know, and it's just a game, but really there's so much politics in it all as well.
Yeah, which I thought was interesting when you said that The Sims is super political, right? 'Cause
But even football now, I guess, or the Olympics, right?
I mean, if football isn't political, I don't know what is, right? Yeah.
I think also what you were saying about children made me think about how we call that innocence, right, in children. But actually, I think to take children seriously as our, you know, co-collaborators in the world that we're seeking to build, I think it's to understand that it's not just innocence, it's like a way of knowing, right? Like children have this wonder because they haven't been beaten down by the rules, or they don't know the rules in loads of different ways. And I think part of the project of the imagination is refinding that wonder for our political projects, because often what makes those projects seem kind of cyclical and dull and never ending is that they're repetitive, or there isn't that sense of childlike wonder. We're not able to look at something that we know to be a table and call it a cow or a sheep or a whatever. And the fact that kids can do that, I think, is a skill that we have to learn from them, definitely.
It's nice because Maria Lugones actually writes about this, of course, clearly, where there's a certain sense of play, what she calls, that's very competitive and it's dealt with winning. And she says, that's not the play that I want to recognize, right? The play that I want to recognize is where I can lose my reason, so I can find new worlds around me.
Exactly.
And I think there is a major difference.
I think we have time for one very last question or comment, if someone has one. I think there's one just here.
Oh, cool. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for the thoughtful and generative conversations. I have two questions that I think are related, but I'm not sure. And I suppose the first one is a comment around the articulation of language and thinking through the ways in which language allows different systems to take shape. And I suppose it made me think on a kind of serious note around the ways in which, like the history of money, and those ways in which, for example, the banknote came to be, and the ways in which, like, the promise and the kind of like I owe you, right? And the promise and the debt that comes with that promise, which is a linguistic, you know, performative action that occurs. And I wonder, in the poetics that was described in the meanings, if the game is just a trap, actually, and is actually something that makes or gives importance to money in a way that seems like this conversation is trying to subvert and push against. So I was just like, that's a comment. I think it's related to the Hans Hacker example, but I kind of don't get that example as a game. So I wonder, I'm just like kind of curious around that. And then a quick side note, I didn't catch the designer for the Dosh game. I don't know if you mentioned, but yeah, those are things.
I'm the designer, along with the team at the Serpentine as well. They really put a lot into it, but the idea is that it accompanies the sound piece. But do we want to do because I think that's a super interesting question, and obviously it comes at the very, very end. But does everyone want to do a quick like response to that, and then we can and then we can kind of like wrap up. So who wants to go first?
Well, I guess I'll give a little what's the word, clarification on the hacker piece. The way that the information was presented there in that gallery was very straightforward. It's pieces of paper on the wall, go ahead and read it, I suppose, right? And the precedent that I was thinking about that perhaps I didn't explain very well, recently there was a collaboration between a video games company and the Financial Times where they created the Uber game, where essentially you find out, you play as an Uber driver and you perhaps drive people for about 5 days, and then when you feel like actually you're earning quite a lot and it's all good, and then at the end of the game all of your expenses come out and you find out that you've been earning $2 an hour or something like that. So I guess that's the big spoiler. But the beauty of it, of course, was that it was released via center-right newspaper. But anyways, a certain experience and information was presented just in a very, fairly simplistic way via a game. And knowing that now at this point, I suppose games are bigger than video, than music and film industries combined, so many young people actually take in so much information via that medium, and it is possible to utilize it for presentation of information in a much more creative way. People hardly now go to a piece of paper and just read it all in full. Maybe it is possible to just utilize that medium for a very quick exploration of whether that's corruption and or any kind of news that should be known about way in a much more depth by much larger populations that would perhaps be picking up something that is written in a very, very basic form. So that was it. But I really want to agree with your provocation in the sense of that. It sounded almost Adornian, I'm not a scholar in any shape or form of his thought, but he sees so much of culture as a trap, right? In a sense, it's like the one space where kids get to play politics, whereas actually, the adults are essentially playing their material games, and what. So much of what we do culturally, whether that's sport or circus, or of course he talks so much about film as well, is just spaces where people that are essentially losing and will lose out on all the material, on any access to material wealth, are just kind of pretending to each other that they have any power, whereas really it's all taken away from them. And it does feel sometimes so often in all culture there is reproduced with that, but also squeezes out that enjoyment of any play or game, knowing that everything is so rigged against you anyways.
All right. Yeah, do you want to?
I might be misunderstanding the question, the kind of provocation, but I guess for me, I think it kind of depends on the game, right? Like I do understand this idea of, I think gamification is a trap, right? Like the way that we're taught to think about the very serious aspects of how we live and the disastrous ways in which we're forced to live through games, like, right? So we can only think of the plight of Uber drivers if we be an Uber driver for 3 days on the computer, which is like dystopian and incredibly terrible when you think about labor practices and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, so I think that kind of gamification definitely is a trap in a way, and limits possibilities, limits our ability to really become conscious of the dire material situation that we're in. But I also think there are spaces in which games might be able to open up and unlock and absolutely do the opposite of that. But it depends on, I think, the environment in which that game is conducted, what the rules are, how people relate to one another, where is the game set? Is it hierarchical? Is it not hierarchical? There are so many conditions, I think, that don't maybe make me think about that provocation in lots of different ways, I guess. But yeah, that's how I'm thinking about it.
Cool. And Micah, do you want to have the last word on this?
So if I think about language and the game, and if they're entangled, if I understand your provocation correctly, like in the case with me and my brother, with Monopoly, it was quite easy because we had an idea of what the rules should be, and by subverting the rules, we could reorder the conditions, right? And with some language games, like the language game of the social language game of money, it's very easy to drop the language game, but then the people that have power don't drop the language game. And then suddenly we're just back at the material conditions, right? Because the space between them is actually quite close, rather than far away, right? So even if we narrate things differently, and we do that all the time, and it's called political consciousness raising, right? That is what you were talking about in your description of the game. This is what you are doing with your game, and it's actually your artists are also constantly doing that. It's consciousness raising. We do not need to accept the conditions as they are in the way that they are talked about. And then we're back to what you said as a child about your poor self. I wish somebody had a conversation with me that I was not responsible for these conditions, right? And that is, I think, the answer that Jay already gave in the beginning, and I think that answers your question, if I understand it right.
Thank you all for coming and joining me in this conversation.
Thank you for having us.
And thank you all for listening and for participating as well. So we're gonna basically all go to the bar after this for 5 minutes. And then the sound piece itself, which is the kind of instigation for all of this, will be played. It's 45 minutes, and it's kind of designed specifically for this space. We spent a lot of time making things come out of speakers and all of that kind of stuff, so it's super cool. And you can just bring a drink, rock up, sit wherever you like, walk around the space, and just kind of enjoy it. Thank you all so much for coming, and good night.
I live roughly within like Midhern Hill and Brixton, so I'll say like around here roughly.
I live up in West Norwood.
I live in Tulse Hill.
I was born and first grew up living around Wandsworth area and then moved up to Brixton, and now I'm at a school in Dulwich.
Went to school in Tulse Hill, and I grew up 10 minutes down the road, near the Hootenanny.
I live in a bungalow. A couple of steps, you walk into like a really nice area. Then 2 steps later, boom, you're back into like a not so nice area, you know, where the pavement's bumpy and stuff.
I think the nicest place where I live is most probably Dulwich. You got the college there, got the running track, you got the park.
I live in this area here. Herne Hill.
Money's quite abstract, so when I hear money, I don't really think of money as in itself.
Like it's not a real thing, but we give it a purpose, and that it's something different to everyone.
Because, like, appearance is like, it kind of has something to do with money. There's kind of like a little connection.
The richer you are, the harder it is to imagine not having that surplus money. It's harder to imagine like wanting things and not being able to have them.
I think, you see, with people from like with less money, yeah, they value like going out and experiencing things for yourself. Like, when I was younger, I was always with my dad. Everywhere he goes, like his shadow. But when I want to go and explore an adventure, it's not like I can just ring up my dad and say, "Dad, let me get £200 because I just want to have an adventure." You get?
Money is human greed personified on paper.
I guess it's only difficult to talk about money when it is difficult. You know, when you have money, it's so easy to just talk about how well you're doing in life. Privilege multiplies, I guess it is an exponential power.
Where does money come from? Well, I feel like obviously they make it and they print it off in factories and stuff. From my point of view, I feel like it's fake, but at the same time, kind of not.
So I grew up in this area, you grew up in this area, you live in this area, we're all from the same place, right? We all have very different socio-economic experiences. But I'm also just really interested in how you've experienced and kind of view the place, right? So if you both close your eyes. I'm watching you. If you just zone in to a particular journey that you take a lot. So it could be something super simple, like just a journey to school, journey to the corner shop, journey to your friend's house, you know, really simple journey. And start at your front door. When you open it, what's the first thing you see? What do you smell? What do you hear? And as you get to the street, do you turn left, right? and you begin the journey. How would you describe that area? I think about like each stage, so the landmarks. Is there a corner shop that's always there? Is there a person with a cup always asking for money? Is there a really beautiful building every time and you think, oh wow? Think about the people that you're passing. What kind of people are they? Think about the people that you're interested in and the people that you try to avoid. What's the difference between them? Do you fit into the area? Do you feel like everyone's like you, or do you feel like they're very different? Once you're done, turn around. Really imagine yourself leaving. Be sure to look up and look down as well as you travel back. And what's the weather like in your imagination? Are there parakeets? Are there pigeons? If you grab your pens and free write everything that came to mind during that journey.
I was doing drawings because I can visualize. I prefer to visualize things. But my house, like where I actually live, it's like it's not an estate, but it's like a miniature estate. It's like a little walk, but there's house. It's not no big blocks or anything. It's just house underneath, house on top, house underneath, house on top, and there's about what I don't know, about 15, just like that.
Walk out road littered with leaves, pavement structured with the roots of trees, the bus stop where at one end you can stare straight down to see St. Mark's Church, Lambeth Town Hall, and just perhaps a glimpse of the Shard.
And then there are these boys on scooters that pass me, then crane their necks back if I'm wearing a low-cut top that day. Drive like you have kids on the floor in chalk and blue, and I think about these white families and their kids, and how in ways I wanted to be their kids. I wanted to be white and pure, and I feel a Riz and £10 in my pocket.
When you come out of the walk on the road, they're beautiful houses, like very big, maybe like 5 bedrooms and all that. And just walk down the road. The other road, very similar, walk down. When I've reached the bottom of that hill, it's like, not saying there's a change, but there, you can see the change. There, it's more, there's more, like, more people, a lot more people, like more hectic and loud. And you're not just seeing one type of person, you're seeing all different types of people, different mindset, different religion, just different in general.
And then as the bus turns, you see blocks of flats rise high around, towering over the boy rushing towards the bus stop.
I'm passing awake, 9 nights, everyone's standing outside talking. Go back inside your mother, it's too dangerous for you out here.
And it turns again, the towers melt down into semi-detached houses made of brick, where the only sound is parents who can afford to drop their kids off at school, where parents can talk of earning 20 times more than my own parents.
Then when you walk up the hill, silence, no car driving up and down, no, everyone just seems to be in their house. There's no one on the road. But when the people you see on the road, they're not like normal people you see. It's like they've been out on the road for the whole day, maybe weeks. Just lost the plot, crazy people, really and truly. And then you're back at my house, and it's quiet. And sometimes in the winter, the lights outside the house don't work.
person. Where I live, like majority, it's like working class. Because of gentrification, like, even the market over the last 20 years, I've seen huge. Well, not 20 years because obviously I'm not 20, but like from what I recall,
When you came out the room, just
it was more hood, I would say, more raw in terms of like. Now I would say it's more like it was more cultural, in fact, obviously because, yeah, I can't really. It's hard to describe it, but yeah. I feel like I'm seeing more like even Guinness Trust, like round here roughly, for example, completely changed. Like 9 years ago, it was terrible. But now I can see like gentrification has been actually put in place and a lot of changes has happened. I feel like after the riots happened, that's when gentrification obviously soared. Literally, house prices obviously decreased. So obviously more wealthy people obviously bought houses here. Then it just, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, you see, so people in urban areas, there's like a fight for space. You get, so especially when you live in like a capitalist society, you have to pay your way.
I mean, to be honest, I don't know, I wouldn't have as much to say as you, but with the kind of change, but what I've noticed is Brixton just getting this cool, like, trendy, funky place, and it's a really, like, cool place to be. And I think maybe that's because it has such a blend of people and culture and...
So you both sort of wrote down your the income that you think would be really good for you and your parents' income. Do you want to sort of share the one that says what you think would be a good salary? Who's going to go first?
I don't know if this is right, but I think so my dad's a doctor and I think he earns 400k.
I said under 50 here, but that's because it's a single parent household. Yeah.
My dad's on furlough. Then he also has he has like a side hustle of he's trying to be a tennis coach. So I'd probably say like my dad's on 25k before tax. Then my mum's on like 35k before tax. And then with my dad's like side hustle of being like a tennis coach, there's just unfortunately been some barriers because of like his language ability and like his confidence. And then it's just, yeah, I feel guilty because it's like I want to help you, but I can't put English in your mouth.
So I'm really used to my parents' finances because I have to fill out all my scholarship forms and stuff like that. So I'm always having to look over like the bank accounts and stuff. So my dad's an Uber driver and he earns about 25k a year. And my mom's recently been like going on looking for like nanny jobs. And I guess where you said I can't put English into your mouth sort of struck me there because I'm always worried about, oh, what if my mom, you know, she's been learning the language for years and yet sometimes she stumbles and I don't know whether that will hold her back from getting a job or not, even though she's extremely capable at what she does.
My mum is a carer and she still had to work during COVID, but she's not working right now because she's due to have a baby on Friday.
When I was younger, I more thought the more you get paid like your wage, the higher it is the more valuable your job is. It may be to society or to the person who's paying you. when I've gotten older, I do think that that's kind of not true, because obviously a nurse doesn't get paid a lot, even though they are helping people.
I don't think they're in a position of power, but if a nurse for some reason might want to call in sick, she gets sick pay and things like that, but there might be consequences from her actions depending on how much days she's taken off.
Well, luckily my mum didn't really have to go to care homes, but rarely she did. But some of the times on the weekend she was mostly at the care homes. But she would mostly go to people's houses, and I was actually really upset and scared about that, because it's more germs and more like stuff that's going on. So I'm doing this job for this certain amount of money, but it's actually, my life could be taken away from it.
I don't know, I guess it's sort of, you know, going to a private school and coming from a very rich family, it's just, you know, I was born and there you go, I just got it, I didn't have to work for it, I just have it, and it feels so wrong, but then I'm also not going to push it away, because obviously it's an amazing thing to have, and I'm really lucky to have it, but yeah, it's quite weird.
Obviously, I don't know. Sometimes I do, obviously, because like I obviously was raised in a working class background, so I understand the hardships, and I see obviously the negative sides of not having money, if you get what I'm saying, and obviously the effects. So in terms of like providing my family with financial freedom, exposing them to like crazy, like a crazy quality of life, you know what I'm saying? Amazing opportunities. I feel like, yeah, I want to be that person that obviously gets my family financially free.
Like, I go to a private school, so I'm very lucky in life. So I thought that, I'm not sure, I thought that my privilege would be something that good to talk about. I'm not sure how to put it exactly.
Do you have enough or too much or too little?
I'm not sure that I have too much, because of how there's like this idea that if you have money, you'll want more of it, because your expectations, like because you have, say you have £1 million, you're like, oh, getting £1 million is possible. Like, why didn't I get 2 million? Why didn't I get 3 million? So I think I'm not like, I don't have that much money, but I'm lucky and privileged. I get to go to this really good school. I'm not like corrupted by it. I'm not like fueled by the need for money.
And do you feel like your parents earn more money than other people?
Definitely, yes, they get to, and especially since they're both relatively high up in like where they work in the industries.
You just said, for example, that you don't have a job yet. I know that you're doing some shady underground stuff, but we're not going to talk about that. What else do you think you're receiving from your parents at this point?
Like a guarantee to try and, in all of their ability, to keep me safe and to keep me comfortable within reason. Like, they're not going to buy like a whole new apartment or anything, but like that I'll never feel uncomfortable or unsafe wherever I am is like what their aim is.
Well, I think the fact that there are big differences can, be really linked to sort of emotions and because it does affect people's lives really greatly, that it can, be linked to things other than just the, material money.
Yeah, so like obviously there's a significant gap between middle and working. And obviously for those who are middle, well not middle but like working class, being exposed to like that type of quality of life made, I don't know, like just feel like a dream, I don't know. So yeah, so obviously there's a huge gap between the two. Nobody wants to be poor, like everybody wants to, do you know what I'm saying? Enjoy life. But yeah, so like having, like going through hardships or like going without, like, nobody wants to go through that, do you know what I'm saying?
I guess you've devalued something that can't be valued in the first place.
On a global scale, do you feel rich or poor?
Poor.
Rich.
Hurts my head when I think about happiness. Like, what is it actually? What does it come down to? Like, I really cannot describe what happiness is. I can't even think about what makes, well, obviously I know what makes me happy, but why am I happy? I don't know, you end up actually going into a loophole of like, what is happiness? What is life? Like, if I'm laughing with one of my friends, I didn't buy that, but it just happened, I guess.
I feel like there is, especially it's like an English thing about class in England is such a big part of, or just the United Kingdom, I feel like, but especially in England, I feel like it's such a big part of England's English society is class, so it's almost like a taboo to ask how much people earn because it's such a like fundamental part of and even though it's not like a feudal system where it's like you have to do this is how you have to live, it's more of like a, I don't know what it is, but it's like a certain structure where like, I think maybe because people, they don't want to, because if you acknowledge that you have more, then you have, at one point under British rule in India, a bunch of Hindus got shot. It was called the something massacre, but then we still haven't acknowledged, like, made a formal complaint, because that means that then if we did that, we would have to, like, acknowledge it and to give money as, like, a sorry, here's, like, our way of kind of, like, making it up to you monetarily, like, to make up for what you've lost with this person. So we haven't acknowledged that ever happened formally, because it's like that means that then we would have to, like, put aside all of this money to give to them and put aside all of these resources to, like, acknowledge it and apologize for it and stuff. And I think it's partially like that, like, if you acknowledge that, say you have like tons and tons of money, and then, like, somebody else is like, they can only just scrape by, they can't even, that means that then you have to, like, give them some, but you don't want to give away that money as part of it. But even if you do notice it and then you give that money, then that, like, other people, it makes them look bad as well. It's like this whole different systems of, like, guilt as well, maybe. They were like, okay, so I got like £50 a month, which is quite good. That's really good. But then it's like, everyone's always going out in college, so it's like that £50 a month suddenly turns into nothing, because everyone's going out, and you're buying stuff, illegal stuff. Like, a Benz is like £10. Yeah, like, people would do ket and then go to politics and be like, yeah, man, my mind is so open, man. My friend actually fell off her chair in politics because she was so stoned. And then, yeah, that's the story. And then there's stuff like parties and, like, getting the older years to go buy you if you don't have ID or you look like a child, and you give money to them. And then there's TFL, which is like, I don't know, you don't hear me say this, but I do try to bunk train as much as I can, because it makes me sad to see TFL take out money every day.
Who would you rather hand your money, a drug dealer or TFL?
A drug dealer. I mean, I don't spend money on drugs anymore. But it just takes you to a different place. It's like an experience. And it's sort of like, well, in the group that I was in, was sort of like, if you didn't do drugs, then it's like, it's kind of hard to fit in. So, like, you're doing it, you're spending money to fit in and be accepted and liked, and you need this money to be accepted and liked and bring something to the party. You go for that, a smoke break. That's why all the cool people hang out anyway, especially in the creative industry. Everyone smokes. All the actors smoke. That's how you meet people, because, like, you went to the shop and you bought, like, fags.
I've never had an interaction with drugs, but I guess from what I've experienced with other people, I guess people usually think that, you know, drugs are for working class people who don't know anything better to do with their money. And then, you know, whilst there were people at my old school who smoked weed or whatever, I come to this school and there's ketamine in the toilets or whatever. And I guess it's all about who plays it off better. And also who people care about, because, you know, rich people don't get searched for their drugs, and yet poorer communities, ethnic minorities are over-policed.
I actually know a guy who carries a tote bag instead of, like, a bum bag, because with a tote bag you won't get stopped in a search, but with, like, a bum bag or whatever, it's like you automatically, police have this idea of what a drug dealer looks like, so he carries, like, a tote bag to look like a yuppie, and it works. Like, he looks like he came here 2 years ago and is, like, working for an advertising agency in Shoreditch, but he doesn't.
miss you.
We said left of the diva, so I was like,
Diva. No, left of the dealer. So I'm gonna be the banker. How many hotels?
okay, this was just my dream, guys.
Hotels. How much do they cost? 1,000 each.
I opened mine from the side in the end.
What did we all get?
I think it's 6 million something. That's not enough, that's too little, because then when I buy the house, I'm going to be left poor. I need to be able to buy the most expensive clothes, food, everything. I'm going to have 5 jobs, 5 different jobs that pay a lot of money. Artist, a nurse, a carer, I work in a garage, and I'll help you with your homework, but you have to pay me. All 6 of the jobs on one day, I have to be rushing to the other job. It's 24 hours, then I can have like 10 hours at each job. No, actually I can't. I could have, just under 5 hours, so like 4 hours and 30 minutes. Then I'll have time for me to eat at a restaurant once I bought the house and the Ferrari and put me inside of it. I'll sleep on the floor or in the pool until I can get a bed, until the next day when I get more money. Or I can stay at my mum's house, or I can take my mum's bed and bring to my house.
I think the person who invented this, I forget her name, but basically she made 2 versions, and the game was meant to like look at society, and one was communist and one was capitalist, but then the capitalist version became quite popular, but then only like the communist version because it was working together, and so it wasn't really fun to play with people.
Pornography sale. Is that pornography?
Yeah, pornography sales go.
Wouldn't that be making money though?
Yeah, you're the worker though.
But I get money from my pornography.
Do you know what, this game is from the 70s. They had a different outlook.
Porn. They have quite radical porn.
No, actually, for socialists and communists, pornography was generally seen as ultra-capitalism. It was the literal commodification of the body.
Okay.
So the sale of pornography was the sale of people.
So OnlyFans wouldn't have gone down well.
The communists would not have approved of OnlyFans. Yeah. I never met a capitalist with like no money before, actually.
Well, here I am.
When I was a kid, I used to cry when I lost. It's like everyone had all these houses, and I just wanted to be able to put up a hotel so badly.
So where's prison in this one? There's no jail. Yeah, you always need to be aware of where's prison, because if you ain't aware of it...
I probably won't go to jail. I'm a law-abiding citizen.
Do you think that this game would catch on?
Maybe. I feel like nowadays, especially on social media, there's a lot of discussion around the way capitalism functions.
If there was a way to like combine Cards Against Humanity and this, I feel like it would be very popular.
Maybe you should make it, and then it would be like, oh no, your OnlyFans account got leaked with game to debit.
You are a white TikToker influencer and someone just found your live from 2 years ago where you said a racial slur. Now ad companies have like docked your pay, -2 debits. Like a worldwide domination, like you sign Psycho Records, you get like a music contract, the YouTuber book deal, you get your play at the court. And international stardom, BBL. Yeah, a deal with Boohoo and Pretty Little Thing. chance to make a single with Ariana Grande. Be like Megan Thee Stallion, one of her city girls, hot girl summer.
This is really my like credits.
Yeah. The ultimate influencer package. Yeah.
You know, I guess even though I don't see life as sort of like zero-sum game, someone has to benefit and someone has to suffer. Eventually, I think in our drive to have the most luxurious life, free of labor, we will forget about the others who have had to sacrifice it. And even though I don't imagine that having to do with money, something has to be sacrificed for the quality of life of the others.
I feel like those people like who like I don't know, like Tom and Jerry on the same rugby team, Tom and Jerry like in the same society at uni, Tom gets Jerry this job at the banking place. What I'm saying is not anything new, and it's just a really scary thought that these people who are going to like his school are like the people that might be the Prime Minister for my kids one day and have a choice in what my kids' pension or the cuts that might go to my kids' school or even my pension, and what they get to be in those positions just because they can pay 20 grand for a school that has like a big rugby field. I feel like maybe one day in the future money might be replaced with youth, like, and time. Like, instead of exchanging money, people might start exchanging like their youth, like collagen or like a bone or like a kidney just to stay alive.
I guess I don't see a future in money. A couple weeks ago, I was working with sort of NCS, doing like a sort of local action project where we made packs for homeless people. We gave them sandwiches and water and stuff. And something that really stuck with me was when we were in Leicester Square, and there was a woman. We also bought pads for women, and the most striking thing was she gave it back, and she was like, "Oh, I don't need these because I'm dying anyway."
Do you think you two would ever have met outside of this room?
Obviously, I haven't really met somebody within her parents' financial bracket, if you know what I'm saying.
I probably would have seen him pass in the street, maybe. Probably saw him on the bus, like getting the 3 to Dulwich. No, I don't think we would have met.
Yeah, I think the way our communities are structured, there's sort of some people are destined to meet.